Okay, at this point, it is my pleasure to introduce our dinner speaker tonight. Of course, I've got a bio here because I could not remember all of the wonderful accomplishments that this gentleman brings to the table. So, Phil Crone, JD Executive Officer for the Dallas Builders Association. Phil Crone began working for the Dallas Builders Association in 2006 and served as a focal point for the Dallas Business Association's advocacy efforts. I love the fact that you refer to yourself by last name, and I have to correct that every time. It says Crone. I'm like, no, I'm not going to call you Crone. Phil has helped ensure a better business environment for home builders and developers by working with elected officials on the numerous regulatory, permitting, and environmental issues that impact the industry at the local, state, and national level. Phil also developed a green building program for the association. The program, that came to be known as Green Built Texas, went on to win local, state, and national awards and serves as an important policy tool for the Dallas Builders Association. Following his promotion to executive officer in 2013, Phil helped develop award-winning education programs, a trade show, and a partnership with Operation Finally Home, an organization that builds mortgage-free homes for wounded combat veterans. Phil currently serves on OFH, Operation Finally Home, on their advisory committee. In 2014, Phil received the David Lloyd Memorial New Executive Officer of the Year Award from the NAHB. Phil also received the Gary Camaro Executive Officer of the Year in 2019. The following year was named Professional Builder Magazine 40 Under 40 list. Phil played a key role in establishing a program for construction management and trades training at Collin College. He serves as a co-chairman of the college's Construction Advisory Committee, and at the outset of the COVID-19 pandemic, Phil worked with local leaders to keep the housing industry essential and operational, writing guidelines intended for safe operations. He is currently leading efforts to repair the Dallas Business Association's office following severe water damage caused by the February 2021 storm. Phil has a Bachelor's of Arts degree from Purdue University and a JD from SMU. Please help me welcome Crone to the stage.
Yep.
I don't know if that's flat enough.
Yeah, I'll find it.
Yeah, you're good.
Trying to see if there's any other cool things in this podium here, but looks like they're all out. Jim earned them there, but maybe. But I appreciate that, Jay. I appreciate the opportunity to be here today, and I've got a lot of ground to cover just based on this journey that the housing industry and really us all have been on. At first, I had asked them, what was the first speaker of the day, and maybe I can build on it, and then I found out it's body language. I'm like, great, that's gonna have everybody thinking through that lens. But anyway, a little bit about the Dallas Builders Association. When I try to describe to people what it is that we do, we're basically the Chamber of Commerce for the housing industry, and we try to educate, advocate, and set up great networking events similar to this one with folks from all walks of life in the residential home building community. That could be the first name, last name, custom homes, home builder that you see in your neighborhood who may build one or two a year, up to the big corporate builders like Lennar and D.R. Horton and a lot of the ones that you see building en masse around here. But then also we have associate members who, it's the banks, it's the lumber yards, it's the attorneys, or all the professionals that contribute to our industry. So a lot of similar parallels. I'm glad this looks like a really fun, laid-back group. So, let's kind of get on our journey and just talk a little bit about some of the things that have defined the housing industry, both locally, nationally, statewide for the last few years. And I'll do as much of that as I can in the time that we have, and try to leave some time for questions at the end. But we'll kind of start our story just right after the Great Recession, and most of you all know that we've had and did have a number of really good years here where it just seemed like no matter what, we were adding 100,000 jobs every year, and it didn't matter, what happened all across the rest of the country. Yes, we were impacted by the downturn. Yes, that was a housing-led downturn back in 2008 in that time frame, but as has typically been the case, we didn't feel it as much here in Dallas as other people did across the country. If you had asked me pre-COVID, what is the biggest challenge defining the housing industry? It's labor. And to a big extent, it still is. We haven't addressed those issues. I really was encouraged by what you're doing, just reaching out to the next generation and the college students in the room. So appreciate all the college students being here. Got to meet a few of them. So that's the kind of partnership that you'd mentioned, Collin College, and the things we're doing that is going to help kind of solve this problem that we're having on the labor side as well. Another interesting stat is we built at the height of the right before the last downturn, we built about 40,000 homes a year, and it took until, and that was about 2007, 2008, it took until about 2015 just to get back to that level. And you think about 100,000 jobs every single year, and you think we went through this dip and it took a long time to return to that 40,000 homes a year level. We got way, way behind the power curve. I always try to tell any elected official that'll listen to us that homes are where the jobs sleep at night. So when we have that kind of job growth, we have to have the housing to accommodate that. And it just can't be housing that is of the price point that only Californians can afford. It's got to be, where we put our kids, where we put our grandkids, where let's face it here, we don't have the beaches, we don't have the mountains, we don't have the pretty stuff that a lot of people are moving from. We have a really good economy, a really good market, we're centrally located, and we've got to stick to the fundamentals. And that's why the stuff that I'm talking about is going to impact and has impacted the Dallas market arguably more than any other in the country. But that said, things are still going well. And the Charles Dickens fans out there, I would say, it's the best of times and it's the worst of times. We've got a lot of good things going for us, but there are some real challenges we have to deal with. They had asked me kind of by request to try to find some remarkable data about Preston Hollow in that area. So I asked our partners over at Zonda Myers Research to look at that. And the most remarkable thing about it was how unremarkable it was, in the fact that you average in Preston Hollow, the way they defined it, about 81 homes a year, and consistently over the last 12 years, 50 to 110 homes a year. It didn't matter what happened. You have in the Preston Hollow area the same 7,000-ish homes that you had back in 2010. The only issue, of course, is that things have gotten a heck of a lot more expensive. And if you've been able to acquire real estate and you've been able to look at the lot prices, you're either loving that or you're hating that. If you're looking at your property taxes, we hear from all people about that. But it was also interesting looking at the lot values, and I couldn't find anything. Maybe there's some realtors that know better about this, but I couldn't find any lots under $800,000 in the data set that we were getting. So, you're looking way north of $2 million for the new builds there. Also unremarkable was I thought that the tornado would have a bigger impact because of the swath that it cut through our neighborhood here. One of the amazing things, one of the best blessings about that was the fact that we got to see how some of the new codes and some of the new standards that builders have to build to, how they held up, and fortunately nobody lost their life despite all the devastation that we saw all over the place. And it took, I was doing the news interviews right after that, and they were asking, hey, how's this labor shortage going to impact what's happened here in Preston Hollow? And it really didn't, because everything started because of the insurance company and other things at a different time. And builders had gotten pretty good at doing more with less. There are framing crews out there that used to have 14, 15 people on it that now have 5 or 6, and they're still finding a way, and it's really remarkable how they're going to do it. So we're cruising along like you were, and March 2020 rolls around, and everybody used to tell me, hey, there are no new problems. Well, this was a new problem, at least for just about everybody who was born in the last 100 years. And so we're kind of like everybody else trying to figure out, how did we get here, and how are we now trying to argue for the very continuation and existence of the housing industry itself? Not to mention all those people that were displaced by the tornado, but everyone else who is just depending on their home getting finished, trying to get their home started. There were very real conversations, especially here in Dallas County, about should these projects be allowed to continue. And I never thought in a million years that in my career at the Dallas Builders Association, we'd have to have that conversation, but we did. And we pushed through it because there was and this gets in the weeds a little bit, but bear with me, there was a silica standard, which is dust that's produced on construction sites, and that had to do with airborne particulates. Well, what we did is we realized, okay, this virus has a lot to do, what we knew at the time, with airborne particulates. Let's hotwire that for COVID, and we ended up with a lot of the mitigation measures that went into the Dallas County order that allowed us to stay essential and keep moving. And it was just one of those things where you could get mad at the situation, you could just yell at a lot of people, or you could just put a solution on the table. They'd talk to the commercial guys and they're like, hey, we've got this huge mobile wash station and it's all this, it's $100,000. You can't bring that to the job site next door. There was no way that we were going to be able to do that on the residential side. So we found a way through. We were able to make housing essential, and then we were able to kind of ride it out because we were in a big argument with a lot of our economists who were all thinking that this is going to be like every influenza pandemic, which kind of comes and goes and waves pretty quick. And I'm not a doctor, I'm not an epidemiologist, but it's like, let's consider what the long-term effects are going to be if this is not just a few-week thing. And as we started thinking about that, we realized that the supply chain was going to be the biggest weak point here. And we also knew rather quickly with all these stay-at-home orders that home was about to be more essential than it had ever been before. That your homes, we all lived through it, went through, our homes were our schools, they were our playgrounds, they were our sanctuaries. My wife's a teacher over at Hockaday, and she was doing all these Jane Fonda workout videos because she's a PE teacher, so just not something that she ever thought that she was going to be able to do. Our association we filled our whole conference room with hand sanitizer because that was part of that standard. And we just distributed all that out as much as we could, and then a few to some of the schools around here. But again, just things that we never, ever, ever thought that we were going to have to do. And then we obviously look ahead, and most of you just kind of ahead of this thing, were talking to me about supply chain issues and the home next door, or maybe your kids or grandkids that are building, or any of you that have just walked into Home Depot and seen how expensive lumber is, or seen based on when different things happen, how those short shelves started to look like the way the grocery stores and toilet paper were looking, back 2 years ago or so. I wanted to delve a little bit deeper into the lumber situation because lumber is a significant portion of the price of a new home. And lumber, of all the commodities and of all the materials, has been the most volatile, has been the most challenging for us. Long story short, back in 2017, so again, pre-COVID here, a tariff was placed by the Trump administration at the time on Canadian lumber. Canadian lumber is about 30% of the national supply chain for lumber. And while not a lot of it makes it down here, it's a big part of the supply chain. So what happens up there impacts what happens here. It's the framework of that deal that had always been renegotiated. It's not under NAFTA, but it uses kind of a NAFTA framework, North American Free Trade Agreement framework, and most presidents would just renegotiate that and move on. Well, love him, hate him, anywhere in between, Donald Trump was not most presidents. So what he did is he imposed, at the time, a 24% tariff on Canadian lumber, and the idea was that up there in Canada, they can harvest lumber on public lands, and they can't do that here. So to try to add a little bit more cost parity on the production side, the domestic producers convinced him that if you have this tariff, we'll hire as many people as you need, we'll be able to meet the demand, the customer won't feel the impact, and everything will be good, America first, all that stuff. Well, long story short, the pandemic hit, everybody justifiably freaked out for a while, and then it turned into a long-term deal, and they did not meet the demand. And they still haven't met the demand. But now they're kind of in a perfect position because there's obviously a ton of demand. Housing's more essential than ever, especially in this area. They have this tariff, so they're not their biggest competition north of the border is already playing from behind there, so they were able to hire just basically 2 shifts instead of 3, produce a little bit, make record profits, and then lumber went up upwards of, on average, $30,000 on an average home around here. And just to put that into perspective, in Texas, if a home price, and it doesn't matter how it happens, goes up by $1,000, you price 20,000 Texas families out of the ability to afford that home. And you're like, well, what's it over just a 30-year mortgage? You all can do that calculation way faster than I can. But the point is, everybody has a limit on how much they can afford. And that's how the numbers shake out with every $1,000. And that's what happened to not just lumber, but a lot of other materials all at the same time. You know, before, and these things would be pretty temporary, we'd have a hurricane and lumber would spike for a little bit, or we would have a big Texas freeze, or a big winter storm like the Texas freeze that we had, and PVC would be really hard to find and it would go crazy. You remember that was tough for a few weeks, but then it kind of trickled back in despite all the damage that we had. Again, that was typical. You have a big flood, you know, hurricane or whatever, brings in storm surge, drywall, you know, would go crazy. But this was whack-a-mole. Everything was just going crazy at the same time, and it still kind of feels like it's that way. Lumber is still up $19,000 on average, so it's still at a very elevated rate, but not just how much everything's gone up, but just how quickly it has and how difficult it's been for people to plan their business around all of these disruptions, and it's really a lack of certainty. You know, I think the big thing for all of us, no matter what our business is, on the challenges of the pandemic have just been the various manifestations of the lack of certainty. And it really has manifested itself on the home building side with these materials and the issues that we've had. Appliances, you still have to order appliances a year in advance in some cases. One of the interesting things is Lennar, you know, again, 2nd or 3rd largest builder in our market, to try to close a few homes out in a few subdivisions, they went and raided the local Best Buy to get all the appliances that they could just so they could close a home and move on. Back to the lumber thing for a little bit, you may have seen a news article that we did where D.R. Horton, the largest builder in the world, they should be able to get whatever they want, and in many subdivisions, they're only able to build 1-story homes because they can't get the beams and the trusses needed to stack that lumber up for the 2nd story. It's the biggest builder in the world. So that's just kind of showing you how that's working. The HVAC equipment, there are new standards that are coming out next year in terms of how efficient that has to be. Already, as it is, builders are facing basically double the timelines of what it took to deliver that equipment. They don't know when it's showing up, and that's leaving a lot of homes open a lot longer. And just another one, they ran out of, a few places actually ran out of lighting fixture boxes, those little blue boxes that you put the switches in and you wire everything up. This is like stuff you don't even think about. It's like, how do we run out of that? It's easy to make, but it comes from places that are difficult to get things from, most significantly China right now. So we're, you know, windows, I could go on and on, but the point is it's so many things at once and it's so volatile that's creating a situation where now the average price of a new home in this area is about $360,000, and a lot of that is only that low because our members are building in cities that I never thought we were going to have to work with for maybe another, 10, 11 years. You're thinking way up close to the Red River, way out east, way out into Kaufman County, just to try to find the less expensive land so they can back into these price points that a majority of the market can afford and that a majority of these jobs can sleep at night. So that, and that number, by the way, back in 2011, you remember the days when it was really common to find a new house under $200,000? Yeah, the median home price back then in 2011 was $190,000. So wages have only gone up by about half that much. So when it comes down to it, if your product is increasing in cost by double the amount of your consumer's ability to afford it, you've got some challenges. And that's really, if I had to just boil down what's going on in the housing market, that's kind of it right now. I mentioned the labor shortage and some of the interesting and I think challenging elements about that because it's still with us, even though it hasn't been as big in the windscreen because of the other things that we've been dealing with. Well, you look at even pre-pandemic, we were missing about 20,000 workers in the DFW area. When you look across residential and commercial, that's everybody. And then you look at the age of some of the people that are doing those jobs. The average age of a trim carpenter in the state of Texas is 49 years old. The average age of a master plumber is 55 years old. Nothing at all against anybody that age, but you don't want to be framing homes, and you don't want to be a master plumber much longer at that age, and you don't have to be because you've made so much money because you've been in demand for the last decade plus without looking back. So that was a big reason why we launched that Collin College program, because they've got those trades trainings, they've got an HVAC, electrical program, plumbing, construction management. I'm trying to tell everybody that, you know, it's not just the folks up there on the roof that are swinging a hammer, it's the people that represent the products, it's the people that organize these jobs, both residential and commercial. So it's all spectrums of the education environment, but also I think it's a very neglected spectrum of the educational environment when you talk about our trades and you talk about, you know, the shop class that a lot of us used to have. I grew up in a rural area in Indiana. It's shop class. It was a big part of our school, and everybody was really proud of it. It was right up there up front. Well, some of these just don't exist, or they're an afterthought in our programs, and I'll talk to my wife about that, and I'm like, you know, the education system in general is really good at making students mediocre at what they're not interested in. It needs to get, it's true, I see some of the stuff she's teaching, I went through it too, but it needs to get better at making kids extraordinary at what they are interested in. I really preach that to the kids at Collin College all the time, and I tell them, you know, look, I don't know if you felt valued when you were in middle school or you're in high school or you're just here because you didn't think you had another option or you didn't think you had another job there. Well, now they're getting offers, even while they're in school, that are $70,000, $75,000 a year. The employer is paying for their school, and by the way, that program, the 4-year program they're getting ready to launch, only costs $12,000 for the whole 4-year program. How many of you have sent a tuition check that's more than that to a 4-year school just for a semester? Yeah, I know. I mean, I went, and I'm like, look, I went to SMU for law school. I went to Purdue for undergrad. I screwed up and did all the wrong things. So, like, you know, do as I say, not what I did. But that's our future, and I think immigration is also a big part of our future that I think, and it's, you know, I work for both parties on Capitol Hill, so I think say this fairly, that each and every one of them for many years has said, okay, well, we need to fix this system, we need to get more certainty into it, we need to find more options here, but nobody ever really wants to because they want to kind of keep doing this the whole time, and that's gotten worse since even the time I worked up there, but there's got to be a way for that part of our industry, and that part, you just look at the demographic changes that are happening here, those opportunities to be able to happen as people age out of the industry, and I think there can be some good policy that balances that need with the responsibility that needs to come with those programs. So that's just a big part of what we try to work with our elected officials on, and you know, I like it. I tell our members, and you know, like I said, I work for both parties, that we're not D's, we're not R's, we're H's, we're Housers, and we can talk to anybody about anything there. One of the things that I'll talk about just briefly is, you know, just another example of kind of locally what we're dealing with is the city of Dallas. You've seen a lot of coverage on the permitting challenges that the city has had, and you know, again, just the most mundane ministerial task that you have in a lot of cities, and because Dallas, actually for a while, you could, most cities it takes 2 or 3 weeks to get a building permit. In Dallas, you could do it basically in a few hours in some cases because it was a very personal, in-person experience, and you were just able to take your plans down there, work with somebody, sit across the table, get everything done, and you're out of there. Sometimes it'd take you longer to park than it would to get somebody to review your plan. Well, when COVID hit, a lot of cities had this kind of all done online, and you know, it was impersonal, but you got it in the 2 to 3 weeks. Dallas just wasn't ready for that. And to try to adjust and to try to move such a large organization with a lot of complex things that go into those permits, it created and has created some really unique challenges, and it just has added to that uncertainty. What used to take 2 or 3 hours, in some cases, it was taking 4 months just to get the same permit. And of course, nobody expected us having to do the virtual thing as quick as we did. But that shock to the system, it's cost a lot in tax base. It's been something that from the city manager to the mayor, everybody's been working on, and we have to keep working on it and get through it, because that is encumbering our city from adding to the tax base, fixing the roads. A lot of them need fixed, as you've seen out there, and just doing the things that typically happen as you accommodate growth out there. You know, so I'm sitting here and I'm trying to figure out, okay, what's the crystal ball look like? And I've fallen into this trap a few times, because I've just come to realize there's like layers and layers of mud on that crystal ball right now. I will say that to work out the supply chain challenges, which again is the biggest thing in the windscreen, we need a lot of things to break our way. The situation in Russia and Ukraine, what Russia's doing over there, you know, beyond just being horrible to the people, it's not causing, for right now, as big of an impact on the oil market as we thought, and that's kind of a combination of just all the reserves that not just our government but others have released, but also the slowdown that's happening in China. Well, like I said, best of times, worst of times. So that's helped on the oil and gas prices and helped at the pump, but at the same time, some of these products or components that come from over there, if they keep up the way they're approaching the virus, that's going to create a lot more of that whack-a-mole and a lot more of that than I want to deal with. But we're going to have to reckon with it, unfortunately. So I think the other big wild card out there are interest rates. It's really, some of it's just economic because of that, you know, $1,000 goes to price 20,000 people out. Well, rate increases can do that quite quickly. But the other thing with rates, it's a mentality thing. If you polled people in my generation, I kind of still qualify as a millennial, so for better or for worse, but if you polled my generation on what a good interest rate or what a normal interest rate should be, they say 5%. So those of you that are older than me can snicker and laugh at that, and you should, because you all are old enough and you're wise enough to know that there are interest rates that have been well into the double digits. There are many builders that have been doing it in our organization in this market for 40 plus years, and they successfully built homes when there were 18% interest rates. If you look at the boomer generation, they think a healthy interest rate should be around 8 or 9%. So just as things creep a little bit closer to 5%, it may cool off some of that demand. That may not totally be a bad thing if we're still catching the supply chain challenges here, but that's really going to, I think, create some price instability and just add to some of the other challenges that we've been having. The other one, though, is, and some of you guys have asked me about this, so I want to cover it real quick. The build-to-rent phenomenon, it's not as big of a phenomenon here right now, but it's starting to become a necessity of homes becoming increasingly less affordable, that you're seeing a lot of, you know, very well-capitalized groups jump into the build-to-rent realm there. It's very popular out in Phoenix, and we're seeing probably, you know, 10, 12% of the market starting to shift over to it. So that's going to be significant, but also we have to think about this, and I've reminded a lot of policymakers and our members that just the attitudes towards growth. You know, you realize that this is a great place to be. We've added a lot of jobs. People are coming here for a reason, but also at the same time, there's a lot less elbow room than there used to be, and that started to bring up, and you see it all over the place, manifest in different ways, just that not in my backyard type of mentality, or my neighborhood achieved absolute perfection the moment I arrived, and anybody else that comes here after me, no bueno, I don't want you here. So that, there's this thing called Nextdoor, if you really want to see it on display, along with a whole lot of other forms of idiocy. So, but that's a whole nother speech. But we've got to tackle this, because it's not, you know, I love making fun of California. It's really easy to do, but that growth constraint, that not in my backyard, let's find a reason not to develop these things mentality that's driven a lot of people here, it doesn't know a political creed. It can pop up on the progressive side. You see it happening in very progressive areas of our city. It can happen on the more conservative side with this whole, keep it country mentality that we deal with a lot of cities that otherwise will experience growth. They'll try to have minimum lot size of an acre or more, and it's difficult because politicians will understand that we have an affordability challenge. They know what the stakes are in general for this region, but at the same time, that's their constituents. You have who you have, and they vote for you, and usually these people that are talking about this stuff are among the more vocal and sometimes well-capitalized ones. So, that's just something that we have to reckon with and try to humanize this a little bit, try to let them know that, these are our kids, these are our grandkids, these are wealth-creating opportunities of home ownership. Anybody that owns an investment property has seen that. Well, it should be the same for a family who's never experienced home ownership before. They should have that appreciating asset and that American dream, and that's what we try to work really hard to do as the Dallas Builders Association, and really do our best to put our best foot forward. You had mentioned the soft skills, and I'll kind of close with this. One of the other things I talk to the Collin College students about, and they're like, hey, what's the secret? What's the skill that you need out there? You need to be able to talk to people. You need to be able to empathize with the person that is your client or your customer, or maybe on the other side of the counter at the city permitting office. You don't have to walk a mile in their shoes. Just walk a quarter mile. Understand where they're coming from, understand their concerns, and I would see so many issues get worked out that builders are having with customers out there. People are used to getting bad news. Unfortunately, we've had a lot of that in the last 2 years. But if you're just honest, frank with people about here's what we're doing, we're in this together, we can get there. And I think where we're going, collectively, we can get there together with a little bit more empathy, and hopefully some of these challenges will work out. And if there's time, I'd love to take any questions. If there's not, then it's because I rambled on too long. Yes, sir.
For years, decades, I thought if I ever knew I was going to live in a house for 25 years, I would build it with steel 2x4s and framing. And with termites and warpage and tornadoes, it seems like a great idea. And number two, what do you think about these new products that look like shingles but are actually solar?
Yep. So, good questions, both on alternate building materials, steel framing in particular. Y'all look at the prices of steel, and you'll see it kind of following the price of lumber. So it's on a tough trajectory too for pricing. There's also some skilled labor concerns just trying to frame that when most of the labor base is used to framing with wood. Fasteners and all those things are a little bit different, and not to get too deep into thermodynamics because I don't know it that well, but the energy code favors wood because it doesn't transfer heat as well as steel does. So there's just a lot of considerations there. But that said, and there's one right across the street from Bryan Adams High School that one of our members built, a whole little development there out of concrete walls. So he basically has created, it's a form made out of styrofoam. He's poured concrete in the middle of it. And for a while, the price of framing like that, which is basically an igloo cooler and it's tornado proof, was almost on par with a traditional stick-built home. It's since, because concrete's gone up, gotten more expensive. But builders are looking at it, and that's the message we've had for the lumber guys is y'all are trying to work yourselves out of a job, and if we could find a way to do it, we would do it. Solar, that's another, I kind of joke with the solar guys. They come to some of our code hearings, and they always think, now's the time to do it, and I'd love to do it. There's some good products out there, from the panels and the leaseback situations to some of those solar shingles that don't look like the Starship Enterprise is parked on your roof. But they're just not, they're not in the mainstream in terms of being cost effective yet. But I think with the way the energy code is going, it's going to take less solar for homes to get to the point where they can be energy independent. But then the other aspect is that we need Elon Musk to solve is what can we do to kind of store some of that energy there. And then there are other issues that I won't get into with just our power company and who owns that stuff that gets produced and goes back in the grid. They kind of like to get it on both ends. So I'd love to there's been some great innovation there. There will continue to be. Just on energy efficiency, the homes that we were building when I started at the association in 2006 are basically, what we're doing now is about twice as efficient as what we built then. And there aren't a lot of industries that have moved that quickly on the efficiency realm like housing has, just with the code, just with the least efficient home you can legally build. Yes, sir.
Is there any, or do you have any information on customers here in the Dallas-Fort Worth area that do 3D building of houses?
3D building of a home. A couple people have tried it. I have no idea. I don't think they've even really cost modeled it into other than just a one-off experimental type of thing. There is one development that I think is giving it a go in the Austin area that I'm looking at. So I don't know, is that going to be the next thing that allows us to get past the traditional stick-built home? The challenge that you have with these 3D printing machines that are out there is you have to get that slab millimeter perfect. And anybody that has seen people pour concrete or tried to do it yourself, I've tried to do it myself, and I just wanted to be like, foot perfect on there, let alone. But that, there are practical challenges, but that is another one that could really get through some of the lumber crunch that we have here, especially on lower end of the market and the less challenging designs of homes. The stuff that Frisco wants you to build, it's going to be a while before we get maybe that intricate on things. We have time for one more, or are we up? I could do one more, I guess. Yep. All right. Yes, ma'am.
A little bit different than building, but one thing we're noticing in our area is that even the homes that are already built, because there's no new homes going in, the pricing just continues to go higher and higher. What do you think that's going to do to the market?
I think that gets to the heart of my primary concern right now, is that even though we built 62,000 homes last year in this region, it should have been closer to 82,000 because of just how far we've been behind. And so if this region is going to be as competitive as it's been and be the #1 housing market and the #1 job market, you've got to find a place for those jobs to sleep, and you've got to supply the housing. We know how this plays out. We know, what Seattle has done. We know what California has done when you constrain the supply. We're seeing that starting to happen right now, despite our best efforts, and that's going to continue to be the case if we don't find a way to answer the bell on demand. And I'm hoping that we're able to do it. It's really tough to kind of get up here and say, it's hard being a builder because they're selling homes with a waiting list for 20 people or more on it, and the sales managers in these communities have never had it so good. But that's not good for the home buyer. That's not good for the customer. It's not good for your property tax bill. I try to tell people, it's not the home next door that taxes you, your government does, but that's another issue that people feel the effects on and they can get displaced by. So I think this is a time to be innovative. I think this is a time to look at density where it makes sense. And I think this is a time to make sure that everybody has a roof over their head and an affordable place to call home. Yep. All right. I appreciate the opportunity. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Phil. Great presentation. Very interesting on the alternative materials and solar panels. And while we wait on all that, I would just like to remind everyone that in the oil and gas business in the state of Texas, we're doing everything we can to provide power for your air conditioner and gas for your heat. So please continue to support us. We apologize for those high prices, but we will cash your checks. Thanks, everyone, for being here this evening. Be careful going home. We'll see you at the golf tournament.